Few people truly grasp what lies behind certain behaviors, dreams or sensations that emerge with age. There's a quiet preparation that happens in many older adults, but it's rarely understood as such. The feeling that time is narrowing, a sudden urge to resolve past issues, or the desire to reconnect with people they haven't seen in a long time. All of this might seem common, but for some scholars like Edgar Cayce, these are clear signs of a deeper process. According to his observations, the soul begins to receive, while still alive, messages and impulses that align it with a final stage of the earthly cycle. This isn't about something mystical, but a phenomenon observed repeatedly in different accounts. The conscious mind often doesn't recognize it, but something internal begins to shift, preparing the human being for a new stage that will come after physical death. Some believe these signs are merely reflections of advanced age, but Cayce argued that behind them, there is an organized though unperceived plan. He suggested there is a kind of subtle training so that the transition occurs with less fear, less resistance. Many older adults report dreams of deceased loved ones, brief visions of unknown but welcoming places, and even unexpected feelings of lightness. For Cayce, this was no coincidence. It was as if the soul, little by little, was being desensitized from attachment to matter. And while all this is happening, the older person themselves rarely realizes they are partaking in a process much larger than they imagine. If you're enjoying this reflection, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. This content can help more people better understand this delicate time of life. A curious point observed by Cayce was how certain older adults changed their way of seeing the world without a clear reason. Suddenly, they began to value silence and contemplation more, and what once was a source of pride or competition less. For him, this was a sign that the soul was beginning to detach from the denser bonds of material life. And this detachment wasn't negative. Rather, it was necessary for consciousness to smoothly migrate to other dimensions. Many accounts included subtle changes in their gaze, their way of speaking, and even how time was perceived. A minute seemed to stretch. An afternoon could feel like an entire cycle. Time, as we know it, began to become less relevant for those approaching another type of existence, one that was broader and less linear. Another indication mentioned was the sensation of being observed or accompanied, especially in moments of solitude. For Cayce, this type of perception was the soul attuning itself to presences from other spheres, beings who assisted in this transition process. And this shouldn't generate fear, but rather a sense of welcome. Often, older adults would start talking to themselves, smiling at something invisible, or even asking questions as if expecting an answer that would come from somewhere others couldn't perceive. These manifestations were, according to him, the result of a gradual contact with the other side. The preparation, then, was not only psychological, but also energetic, emotional, and spiritual. And the most curious thing was that all of this happened so naturally that few realized its true depth. It was also observed that many older adults develop an intense desire to share old stories, even those they had never told before. It's as if something inside them says it's time to put everything down on record, even if no one asks. Cayce interpreted this impulse as a mechanism of release. By sharing what they have lived, the older person alleviates the burden of memory and allows the soul to detach from what has been. The narrative of one's own life takes on a therapeutic role, paving the way for consciousness to proceed more lightly. It's not uncommon that, after recounting something important, the older person feels an immediate relief as if they had completed a pending mission. This type of behavior, often overlooked by those around them, can be one of the clearest signs that the final preparation is already underway. What's striking is that many of these behaviors emerge spontaneously, without any external guidance. Cayce believed that this preparation is part of a larger plan which acts independently of rational will. The soul, according to him, knows when it is approaching a new stage and begins to act in a way that facilitates this transition. And even if the person has no religious beliefs, this process still occurs. This shows that the experience of death is not an isolated event, but the culmination of a process that began much earlier, perhaps even in youth. And if we knew how to better read these signs, perhaps we could offer more support and understanding to those who are approaching this passage. many cases, this quiet preparation begins to intensify around the ages of 70 or 80, although it can vary according to each person's experiences. Cayce reported that more introspective individuals tended to feel the signs more clearly, while those who remained very attached to the external world out of fear or denial might experience a more turbulent process. But at some point, almost everyone goes through a phase where thoughts frequently return to the past. Not just as nostalgia, but as an unconscious attempt to reorganize, forgive, understand, and conclude cycles. This inner review doesn't arise by chance. It's as if time itself calls for a more conscious closure. And when this process is respected, the older person feels more peace, more clarity, and less resistance to what is to come, even without rationally understanding what is happening. It's interesting to note how this process manifests even in small daily gestures. An older gentleman deciding to donate his books, a lady who makes sure to organize her photo albums, or that sudden urge to teach an old recipe to a grandchild. These are seemingly simple actions, but they can indicate an internal need to pass on what has been built, as if the soul is silently saying that it's time to leave the world ready to carry on without its physical presence. For Cayce, these behaviors held deep symbolic value. They not only helped the older person free themselves from attachments, but also allowed their presence to remain alive in the memory of those who stay behind, not as an absence, but as a legacy. It was a subtle way to perpetuate their essence in the world before departing. Cayce also spoke about the role of the physical body in this process. As the soul gradually detaches, the body often begins to show more intense signs of fatigue, fragility, or illnesses with no defined cause. These symptoms don't always indicate a serious ailment, but rather a kind of response from the body to this subtle detachment. In many analyzed accounts, older adults who seemed strong and lucid began to experience unexplained drops in energy, excessive sleep, or even an unusual peace in the last months of life. For Cayce, these signs should not be seen merely as natural decline, but as part of the transition process. The body, sensing that the soul is preparing to depart, begins to reduce its pace, like a ship slowing down as it approaches its final port. There are also cases where older adults demonstrate unexpected wisdom, even without having studied or reflected on spiritual topics. Suddenly, they begin to speak about life with more profound insight, offer more serene advice, and face aging with a lucidity that surprises even those closest to them. Cayce considered this a type of connection with a greater memory, something that transcends individual experience and accesses a broader field of understanding. It's as if the soul, as it approaches the end of its earthly journey, begins to access knowledge that has always been there, but only becomes available when the mind is ready to listen. This serene wisdom doesn't come from books, but from one's own life journey. And when someone manifests it, it's a sign that the inner preparation is almost complete. A delicate aspect of this theory is how current society avoids talking about death. Instead of helping older adults prepare, many try to dismiss any conversation about the subject as if it were taboo. Cayce believed this hindered the process of acceptance and made the transition more solitary. When older adults don't find space to talk about what they're feeling, they withdraw. And with that, the opportunity to make this stage lighter and more conscious is lost. Talking about death doesn't hasten its arrival, but it can bring understanding and comfort. And allowing our elders to share their doubts, fears, and intuitions about this time is a form of embracing care that benefits everyone. Ignoring these signs, on the contrary, can lead to anguish and a feeling of incompleteness that lingers until the very last moments. Also noteworthy is how Cayce viewed the importance of relationships in the final moments of life. For him, the presence of loved ones, reunions with distant family members, or even the resolution of old conflicts played a central role in this preparation process. This is not just about emotional peace, but about the soul's realignment with what it needs to conclude before moving on. Many older adults feel a sudden impulse to forgive someone, to call an old friend, or to reconcile with children they hadn't spoken to in years. These seemingly impulsive gestures are part of an inner wisdom that knows time is running out, and when these encounters happen, something within the older person settles, as if a piece of the puzzle has finally found its place. Observing this behavior, one realizes it's not just an emotional need but almost a mission of closure. Cayce believed that the soul needs to feel there are no open emotional debts for it to find peace in its journey. This doesn't mean everything will be resolved, but that the older person will have done their part, expressed what they needed to, asked for forgiveness, or offered understanding. When this stage is respected, many report an unexpected feeling of lightness, as if an invisible burden has been lifted. Therefore, when an older person decides to make that difficult call, write a letter, or open their heart even without guaranteed reciprocation, it's essential to respect this impulse. It could be the final chapter being consciously written, and for the soul, every small, sincere gesture carries far more weight than one might imagine. Another relevant point in Cayce's theory was the altered perception of time. Many older adults say they feel days pass faster, while others claim hours drag on. For him, this was a sign that the soul was beginning to disconnect from the linear structure of time, as if it were getting accustomed to a new dimension where past, present, and future are not separated as we know them. These accounts were not interpreted as mental confusion, but as a type of perceptual transition. In some cases, the older person could recall something with such vividness that it seemed to have happened minutes ago, even if decades had passed. This compression and expansion of time was seen as a preparation stage for a plane where physical time no longer governs existence, and consciousness learns to orient itself in a different, broader, and more intuitive way. Many family members find it strange when an older person begins to speak of deceased loved ones as if they are nearby. Sometimes they even recount conversations, dialogues, or guidance received. Cayce did not view this as hallucination, but as attunement to spiritual planes. For him, when the body begins to lose energetic density, the mind becomes more permeable to previously imperceptible frequencies. It is not uncommon for an older person to report seeing their mother, father, or friends who passed away long ago, and this brings them comfort. These moments, often dismissed as confusion, can be a form of the soul being embraced, showing that it will not be alone in its journey. When we approach these accounts with respect and a listening ear, we understand there's a deeper logic behind them, and that the older person isn't regressing but accessing something we cannot yet see. Curiously, this preparation process can also awaken an unexpected joy. Even with physical limitations, some older adults begin to smile frequently, hum to themselves, or express gratitude for small things. Cayce understood this as a sign that the soul is freeing itself from material burdens and recognizing, even if intuitively, the value of simple things. It's as if there is a silent wisdom saying that everything made sense, that life was worthwhile. To an outside observer, it might seem like just a moment of good humor, but for the older person it is the soul expressing itself fully. Therefore, moments of spontaneous joy should be welcomed and encouraged, as they are often the last flickers of light before a great transformation that approaches with serenity and acceptance. There are also cases where an older person seems to withdraw emotionally, as if slowly detaching from the world. They speak less, isolate themselves more, observe in silence, and react with less intensity to news or problems. For Cayce, this behavior was not depression, but a natural turning inward of the soul, which needs quietude to complete its process. This silence, often misinterpreted, can be a form of internal reorganization, of energetic concentration. The mind turns inward, the body recedes, and the spirit prepares. In these moments, the most important thing is not to try to pull the older person back into activity, but rather to be present in a calm way, offering security without demanding constant engagement. Respect for this silence is often the deepest form of love one can offer at this stage of life. Cayce suggested that all these signs, however subtle, form a coherent whole when viewed in perspective. It's not necessary for all of them to manifest, nor for them to occur in the same order. But by observing with sensitivity, it is possible to notice that many older adults go through similar changes in their last years of life, and recognizing this process can transform how we relate to them. Instead of seeing aging merely as a loss, we can perceive the wisdom of the soul revealing itself, the spiritual maturity coming to fruition. This perspective doesn't eliminate the pain of parting, but it can give meaning to it. When we understand that death doesn't arrive suddenly, but is preceded by a series of preparations, we can live through this moment with more awareness, respect, and even gratitude. Often, those who care for an older person during this period sense that something has changed, even without being able to explain it. Their tone of voice, gestures, and gazes take on a different gentleness. Cayce said this was a reflection of the soul aligning with a less dense, more subtle reality. It's not a physical change, but an internal frequency that shifts. The older person begins to move differently, choose words more deliberately, and show patience with things that once irritated them. This refinement of behavior isn't a conscious effort, but a natural consequence of what is occurring within. And for those who are attentive, these signs are invitations to a more loving, less hurried, more listening presence. It is at this moment that family and caregivers can realize the privilege of witnessing a soul in its final gestures of transformation. There is a moment, almost always silent, when the older person seems to know they are close to departing. It's not an exact prediction, but a calm perception that something is approaching. Many say their goodbyes in subtle ways, giving signs in words or actions. They leave notes, tidy belongings, distribute special objects. They don't say it openly, but they leave marks that they are at peace. Cayce considered these moments the pinnacle of spiritual preparation, when the soul has already accepted its journey and is ready to move on. For those around them, this can be difficult to comprehend. But with sensitivity, it's possible to embrace this phase with serenity. Death, in this context, is not an abrupt break, but the completion of a cycle that has been carefully prepared. Their crossing that, though invisible, has been accompanied by many signs. Amid so many details, Cayce's great message was that no one departs helplessly. Even in the most solitary cases, there are always spiritual presences at work in this process. According to him, there are consciousnesses dedicated solely to receiving those who leave the physical plane, and the more at peace the soul is, the clearer this reception will be. For many older adults, this contact manifests in dreams, in sensations of profound welcome, or even in moments of inexplicable quietude. These are signs that the journey has already begun internally, even if the body is still present. And the more we understand this, the more we can contribute to this passage being lived with dignity, without fear, without confusion. What to us may seem only the end, for the soul is the beginning of a new stage where consciousness continues its journey. It's important to remember that this process doesn't require any specific belief. The soul prepares itself even among those who follow no religions or doctrines. For Cayce, this transition is natural, universal, and part of the very design of human life. It is the continuation of something that began long before birth and will continue after death. Therefore, there's no reason to fear or deny this reality. On the contrary, recognizing these signs can make us more human, more empathetic, more prepared to deal with the aging of those we love. The closeness of death should not be a taboo, but an invitation to listen, to embrace, and to be grateful. It is in this space of lucidity that the true meaning of life can emerge, and even in the face of loss, we can find wisdom if we are willing to see beyond appearances. Looking at this theory from the perspective of those who are aging, a new understanding of the very value of life emerges. Each phase, each change, each new behavior begins to have a broader meaning. We are not just observing old age, but participating in a silent dance between what remains and what moves forward. Cayce invites us to respect this process as something sacred, even without rituals, even without words. And perhaps by embracing this view, we can change the way we treat our older adults. They are not just people at the end of life. They are experienced travelers who have already begun to cross the invisible bridge between two worlds, and it is up to us to ensure that this crossing is made with dignity, understanding, and presence. May each of their steps be accompanied by respect, listening, and true affection. If you've made it this far, perhaps this reflection has resonated with you. Perhaps you've recognized signs in someone close or in yourself. Knowing that there is a silent process of preparation can transform how we live and how we care for our older adults. And that, in itself, is a form of love. If this content made you think, please share it with anyone who might benefit from these words. And if you wish to receive more reflections like this, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. Every gesture of understanding you practice now can make all the difference for those on this journey. Death doesn't have to be a shock, nor a meaningless end. When understood, it reveals itself as the natural culmination of a life well lived and the beginning of a new stage for the soul.